Hi, and welcome to the Women Birth Collective's Pregnancy and Postpartum Summit. I'm Melissa Chin Casey, and today we're talking to certified professional midwife, neonatal intensive nurse, and transformational facilitator, Karina Fitch. Hi, Karina. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, thank you for having me.
My pleasure. I'd like to just share a little bit about you before we get started. So
Okay.
Karina is a certified professional midwife and neonatal intensive care nurse with over 25 years experience in the field of maternity and newborn care. She's also a certified feminine power transformational facilitator and has been leading women's circles and ceremonies for 2 decades. She has 3 daughters, each one bringing deeper meaning to her work. After her first daughter was born, she became intensely focused on helping pregnant people bond with their babies in utero and cultivate self-care practices that would serve them well into their mothering. During her second pregnancy, Karina wrote, produced, directed, and performed in a theater production chronicling her journey through pregnancy, loss, reconception, and her transformation through motherhood. Her third daughter gave her the terrible gift of postpartum depression and anxiety, which propelled her to work in a new direction, further piqued her passion in maternal wellness. What emerged from these studies of transformational facilitation, feminine power, midwifery, dance, and her experience as a mother was a vision for Motherfly, an organization that she founded, whose ultimate vision is to catalyze human potential through supporting maternal wellness and empowerment. Motherfly programs guide pregnant women and mothers in exploring and embodying what it means to thrive in motherhood. This is so beautiful, Karina. Can you share a little bit about your story and how you got into all this rich, deep, meaningful work and kind of what gave you the direction to begin with?
Yeah. Well, I got into midwifery because I was born in a community called the Farm in Tennessee, that is where a lot of home birth happened. And so it was part of the community. I grew up around it. And by the time I was 12, I was just like, I want to be a midwife. My mother was attending births as an assistant, and she would come home and tell me stories, and I was just enthralled. And so I wanted to be a dancer and a midwife, and I became both. Um, and then after having my own daughter, I would say that was really the beginning of my journey toward Motherfly, which is my current body of work, because it was a very humbling experience, both the birth and the postpartum. Even though I had already been a midwife for about 7 years, my own birth experience really brought me to my knees and really took me. I found myself overanalyzing my labor and trying to be the midwife, and realized that I had to really leave all of that knowledge behind and go deep inside myself as a birthing woman and person, and find what I needed to do to bring her into the world. And
Hmm.
and then motherhood also really humbled me. Um, my second daughter was probably my most blissful pregnancy and birth and postpartum. And then with my third, as you mentioned, I experienced postpartum depression and anxiety about 3 months in, right around the time that Trump got elected. I would say that's when my depression began.
Hmm.
That certainly didn't help. But I found myself really lost. Like I didn't feel like I could continue as a midwife in the same way, having 2 children under the age of 3 and being the primary provider for my family, was just really, really challenging. And I felt, yeah, just such a sense of a loss of purpose, which for me was very uncomfortable and very new, because I knew from when I was 12, like, this was my path. It was always very clear to me. And so it was kind of like, well, if I'm not a midwife anymore, like, who am I?
Hmm.
And I grappled with that for a long time. And although about 5 months after she was born, I came up with the idea of Motherfly and felt really called to it. But there was a lot of journeying I had to do before I could really bring those programs into the world. And yeah, that experience with depression, and it was, very much also burnout. I think being on call already for many years, um, and being a single mom, most of my mothering life was single mom, or even in my partnership at that time, I felt like a single mom, like in terms of just kind of handling all the things. I talk a lot about the supermom archetype in my work. Two different archetypes, really, the martyr and the supermom. And the martyr being kind of like what our model was before the rise of feminism, the first wave of feminism. And that was just the, that person who's constantly in service, who doesn't really exist other than to be in service. And so that, I feel like, was the model for what it was to be a good mom back, in my grandmother's era and before. And then when women started to gain the power and the right to have other identities and to work outside of the home and pursue higher callings, that's the beginning of the supermom. And really, we just added things to our plate. We didn't take anything off. We are still even now, for the most part, the primary caregivers in the home. We do most of the domestic work, and we're holding all these other pieces like partnership and career. So that is really at the heart of why I think so many of us are feeling burnt out, and why guilt and shame are such a huge part of motherhood, because we hold ourselves to these ridiculous standards that have really been set by a patriarchal culture that, exemplifies perfectionism and overworking and never resting. And those have really deeply impacted those, all parents, and particularly mothers.
Yeah, and I want to add to that list of like the concept of self-care being a selfish act. That's another, thing that's kind of put on us, like, well, you're taking care of yourself, how dare you?
Yeah.
And when really it's we have to take care of ourselves, and really in traditional cultures and more, previous to that whole what you were talking about, that martyrdom. I think a lot of traditions around the globe really honed in on the fact that mothers needed to be cared for and needed time and space to be nourished primarily before anybody else. So she could take care of the newborn and she could take care of the family.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. And you touched on one thing in the very beginning when you said that you had to take off your midwife hat, so to speak, and really embody that mothering, that labor, and that birth. And
Yeah.
then after that, you had to kind of find your identity again. It sounds like you maybe lost your identity because of the transformation into motherhood. You lost the old you and finding that new identity. And those are so huge for, all of us who go through this.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's a big piece that is missing in our culture, is the acknowledgement that becoming a mother, becoming a parent is a fundamental transformation of identity. And people are not prepared for that, because we get all these messages about motherhood that are very romantic. And I think, that is changing now, because maternal mental health has become such a widespread issue. There is more awareness growing, but there's still, and I had these romantic notions too. And it's like, really, then you're in the trenches and it's like, oh my gosh, what have I done? Like, what is going on here? And so there's, when we go through puberty, there's a term for that, like adolescence, right? Puberty. And that refers to all those brain changes and hormone changes and physical changes and psychological and social, all these changes happening. When we become a mother, there is a similar word, which is matrescence. And it's again to describe all of those same changes, which are actually 10 times more intense than adolescence. And this is a term that was coined by an anthropologist, Donna Raphael, back in the 1970s. And to this day, most folks do not know this word. So how can we possibly support a process that is invisible to us, that has gone unnamed? And the answer is we can't, and we aren't.
Yeah, I've heard matrescence very few times, and I think it's a wonderful word to just kind of embody the huge, vast changes that are happening to us.
Yeah.
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 So there is a crisis happening. Does it start in the prenatal time, or is it more toward the postpartum? Can you share a little bit more about that?
Well, I believe we're facing a maternal health crisis that's very urgent, and it's on all levels. And it started about 25 years ago when the maternal mortality rates began to climb. The CDC didn't even begin tracking maternal mortality until 1986.
Wow.
Which is crazy, right? I mean, and that kind of speaks to how we don't value the lives of moms.
Yeah, the invisibleness, like you were saying.
Visibility.
We didn't even exist, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And at that point, they were happening at a rate of 7 per 100,000. By 2016, it was up to 17 per 100,000. And by 2020, it was up to 23.8 per 100,000. So the fact that this is happening in a country with all of the resources to do better is absolutely criminal. And, you know, we are the only industrialized nation that has had a rising maternal mortality rate over the last several years. And that really, again, I think speaks to the devaluing of lives and of mothers, and particularly Black and Brown and Indigenous mothers who die at rates that are 3 to 4 times higher than white moms. And that's also like just shameful and criminal. And we know from decades of research that this is the result of systemic racism and provider bias, that, you know, things like socioeconomic status, marital status, education level are not protective the way that they are for white women. And so I don't think that we can make any kind of shift in maternal health until we start to listen to and lift up Black and Brown mamas and Indigenous mamas.
Mm. Yeah.
And then in addition to that, we have the mental health crisis, right? With one in 7 is the statistic of pregnant people that experience a perinatal mood disorder. That could be either depression, anxiety, OCD, during the pregnancy or postpartum. And I think that number is probably higher because
Absolutely. That's the number of diagnosed, right? Number of recorded and tracked.
Right.
And there's so many of us that go
unnamed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And unscreened. Right. And a lot of providers don't screen because they, for whatever reason, but I think one thing is that they don't know what to do if somebody if is positive. They don't have the proper referrals in place. So even some people that are screened are not sent in the right direction. And 20% of postpartum deaths are the result of suicide. Suicide attempts among pregnant and postpartum people have nearly tripled over the last decade. So this is like urgent, right? This is big. This is like a serious wake-up call that we need to figure out what's going on. And I think that, you know, moms have a lot of shame around depression. There's a lot of stigma. They're afraid if they report, maybe their child will be taken away from them, and that has happened. And so, and I think that we are looking at moms as like we're the pathology, when in reality, as Rochelle Garcia Saliga says, postpartum depression and anxiety are a normal response to a society that is not supporting mothers.
Yeah.
And when you think about the brain changes that happen postpartum, one of the big things is oxytocin is a big player. Well, oxytocin does a lot of great things. It makes us, you know, more empathetic, more able to tolerate monotony, which is obviously really important in motherhood. It makes us more able to read nonverbal cues. It makes us feel good and connected, but it also makes us hypervigilant. And so in an environment where we don't feel supported, we're going to tend toward anxiety. And actually, postpartum anxiety is more common than depression. So we really need to learn how to take care of postpartum people. You know, in this country, the medical model tries to kind of box postpartum into a nice, neat 6-week package, during which you get one postpartum visit if you've birthed in the hospital. That's the standard of care. And this is at a time when the mother is sleeping very little. She's going through massive hormonal and physical changes. She's going through the very steep learning curve of learning how to take care of a new life. She may be recovering from surgery or a laceration, and she's going through what's probably the most profound identity shift of her lifetime. And where's the support, right? I mean, it's just so substandard that it's not surprising that we're seeing these numbers in terms of the depression. And then I'm not sure if you're familiar with Motherly. They're one of the biggest media outlets for all things motherhood, and they have an annual survey called the State of Motherhood Survey. So 2021 State of Motherhood Survey showed that 93% of moms are experiencing burnout. That was up 7% from the year before. They're feeling burnt out for like a larger portion of the time. They feel unsupported at home. They feel like, they're still carrying the majority of the burden of domestic and childcare duties. And then they also, 92% feel unsupported by society. And it makes sense. I mean, we just, went through this pandemic where we had to take on even more than what we were already doing. I mean, this was the case. The burnout and the depression was all happening before, but the pandemic really brought it to the forefront and exacerbated it with the added stress and all the uncertainty and the unknowns. And then, the US is the only industrialized nation that doesn't provide paid maternity leave. I mean, it's crazy. If we just could get that right, that would make a huge difference, because I know for me, my depression, a lot of it was financial stress.
Right.
And the anxiety, of providing for my family and being on call and trying to take my baby to births and all the things. And we need more, bottom line, we need paid maternity leave. We need more flexibility in the workplace for parents who are breast and chest feeding. We need more childcare, affordable childcare, and acceptable places for moms to pump in the workplace. And again, I think this goes back to how we don't value mothers. And until we learn how to care for the life bearers and the life nurturers, then it's just going to be a messy world. And we're seeing that right now. I mean, if we look at the state of motherhood and we look at the state of the world, I think there's a very direct correlation, because maternal wellness is really the heart of societal wellness. It's the lifeblood of humanity. And when moms are not well, nobody is going to be well. And I've seen this in my own family as I've gone through my mental health challenges. And I see it, in the larger whole in the world.
Yeah. I was interviewing someone about Ayurvedic perspectives, and in Ayurveda, they recognize that how well a mother is taken care of in the postpartum is going to affect the next 40 years of the entire civilization and society. Yep. And, what does that say for our society if our mothers are so unsupported, in poverty, in a state of malnutrition, malnourishment, lack of sleep, anxiety, depression, even suicide. And then these children are going to grow up, and over the course of the next 40 years, how does that influence our society?
Absolutely. Yeah. In the Moroccan tradition, they have that, they say the first 40 days translates to the next 40 years. And so, that's going to be, and I think a lot of moms are having babies in their 40s or late 30s. And so for me, like my last daughter, I was 42 when she was born. And so there's a whole group of mothers who are navigating both postpartum and perimenopause at the same time, which is also a huge, I think that's been a part of my mental health picture as well. It's like just a lot all at once, hormonally and the toll on the body, So there are, that's why there are traditions across culture, across time, that are very similar all around the world in terms of how they care for postpartum mothers and people. And that, I think, that really speaks to the fact that these are physiological needs of the postpartum body. Like, we need warmth, we need nutrient dense food, we need physical body work, closing of the bones, or massage, acupuncture, moxa, all these practices that bring heat, restore energy and life force to the body are absolutely essential. Rest is a primary postpartum medicine that moms are not getting,
Right.
we don't, as a society as a whole, we don't value rest. Uh,
Hmm.
and, there's so much pressure for moms to bounce back, right?
Yep.
Bounce back to your pre-pregnancy body and bounce back to your pre-pregnancy life.
Yep.
That again, like in those cultures all around the world, those usually it's about 40 days. It varies, a little bit, but mostly 30 to 40 days where that mom is resting and her community is feeding her. And her midwives are doing the body work. Or there's, I think all postpartum people should get seen by a pelvic floor PT.
Hmm.
They should get massages. They should get craniosacral, anything that they can, to help them replenish, because we have to remember that you're not just recovering from the birth, you're recovering from 10 months of being pregnant, which is akin to running a marathon for 10 months as far as what it does to your metabolism. So
Mm.
you would expect an athlete who ran a marathon for 10 months that they are going to be resting, right?
Sure. Yeah.
But we don't offer that same expectation to mothers.
Yeah. And it's amazing to me that it's just 40 days, because when you don't get those 40 days, I mean, that feeling of depletion just goes on and on and on for what could be years. So the fact that if we really pay attention to ourselves, and that our community pays attention to us for just 40 days, I mean, that can do wonders, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's really not a long period of time, but for us in the West, even for moms themselves, it's, I really emphasize to my clients, this importance of rest, and the type of foods to eat, and the support. But I find that usually 2 weeks in, they have that itch to
Yeah.
get active, to move about and do things. So I think culturally it's kind of hard for Westerners to accept that level of support and that level of rest.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It also, I think, speaks to the kind of activities that we value, and also that identity search, right? Like, who are we now? So we want to go back to our identity. We want to go back to grocery shopping, or, getting coffee, or whatever it is.
Right.
When maybe it's not a bad idea to pause and say, okay, let me just rest and find myself a new identity. But yeah, I think that's something that we don't recognize too,
Right.
until we get to that crisis point, right? And you were mentioning earlier that some of us don't report that we're feeling anxious or depressed. And I have to share my experience with you, and that is, I had postpartum depression twice. The
Mm,
first time, I had no idea.
yeah.
I was so busy, so
Mm,
overworked, so overwhelmed, that I just kept on sort of having these like tantrums, these explosions every once in a while, and I couldn't even recognize what they were.
uh-huh,
And I think I was just dishing to someone on social media, in a DM, a stranger, and she
uh-huh,
just mentioned the word, I think you're having postpartum depression. And this
uh,
was maybe 8 months after.
yeah.
Um, and I had had it the whole time, I think.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until she said those words that I was like, oh. And it wasn't that I didn't know what postpartum depression was. It's just I didn't have the time to stop and think about what was actually happening with me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So that
Yeah.
definitely happened. And the second time I had it, I didn't recognize it for a while because I was so happy. I was so in love with my baby. We had bonded so strongly, and I was getting all of this love, and all those like great feelings and all this oxytocin, that it was kind of masked underneath that.
Uh-huh.
And it took me a while to unmask that. Yeah, I was depleted and depressed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. For me, it was, it just started with like feeling really overwhelmed, and also feel like I felt like, um, I didn't know anything anymore. Like I was like, I don't feel like I started to have a lot of insecurity. Like, I don't feel like I'm a good midwife. I don't feel like I'm a good mom. I don't know who I am.
Mm.
And then I started working with a former client of mine who is a therapist, and I work, and I think, and actually I did a screen on myself. I finally screened myself, I scored high, and I still, from that point, it wasn't until maybe 6 months later that I told anybody outside of my therapist,
Mm.
that I sort of came out. I remember I sent an email to a lot of my sister birth workers and kind of came out, and it's so it just, I think that that speaks to the shame that goes along with it, especially for, I guess, for me personally, because I was a midwife, and I kind of felt like I should know better, and I have all these tools, and like, why can't I get over this?
Mhm.
And that was a big piece of my own healing, was like lifting off that shame. And we talk so much about self-care, and that's important, but the thing that's, I think, foundational for you to even do the self-care, because we talk and talk, but most of it, a lot of us don't actually do the self-care
Mhm.
consistently, right? And so what I discovered through my own journey was that self-compassion is what's really underneath that needs to be in place in order for us to do the self-care. If we don't have compassion for ourselves, and we're constantly feeling guilty or beating ourselves up because we're not performing as well as we want to be, or we're not happy, or we don't feel like we're being a good mom because we're depressed, then we're just going to perpetuate that cycle of I'm not enough, and I have to do more, and I have to do more, and I have to do more. And then, it's just a downward spiral of depletion.
Yeah. Yeah. Self-compassion is such a great word, and such a great thing to bring into our awareness. It reminds me of, for me, it was the dropping the perfectionism, just coming to terms with dropping the perfectionism,
Yes.
and reaching out to community, allowing myself to understand that nobody does it alone, and I think that we're in a society where we're kind of trained to think that we're supposed to do everything by ourselves, when the reality is we're supposed to do everything in community and with support.
Right.
And the fact that you reached out is a way to receive. I think that's a way to receive. And um that I did interview a mental health therapist, and what she said is that everyone should establish a relationship with a mental health therapist during their pregnancy. And that's another layer of allowing the community to support you, because the truth is that one doctor, one midwife is not going to be able to carry you through the
Yeah.
pregnancy and the postpartum. You need a whole village, and
Yeah.
so the fact that she said everyone should be establish a rapport with a therapist. You can just call them up and say, hey, nothing's going on right now, but I just want to have like an annual check. I'm pregnant. Can we, have one visit? And you have one visit, establish rapport with them. That way, if anything goes south at any point, especially in the postpartum,
Yeah.
when you're too busy to look for a therapist, maybe
Right.
too overwhelmed to reach out to anyone, maybe too feeling too shamed or guilty to ask for help, then you already have someone who you can call.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So important. And community, I mean, it just can't be emphasized enough. And I think that hopefully on the other, coming out the other side of this pandemic, we've all learned the impact of isolation, to a very profound level of what it has done to us. I grew up in community,
Mhm.
and we lived in houses with 2, 3 other families, big communal houses. There was always tons of kids and adults. And my mother, seeing me raising my children outside of that, um, she was just like, I don't know how you do it. Like on the farm, we had, like, there was always other adults around, so you could get a break, and I
Mhm.
think that it's so key for the mother's health, but also for the children to have different caregivers that they're going to learn different things from, and they're going to develop different skills through those relationships. So it's a win-win. And we think like the nuclear family is this normal thing, but it's only been around for like 100 years, and before that,
Mhm.
it was always these extended villages. And yes, you're absolutely right. Like that idea of I have to do this by myself, again, that goes back to the supermom. That's part of the supermom archetype. That's part of the patriarchy. That's part of this culture that values rugged individualism above all else. And within that, construct, we have this idea that asking for support or needing support is a sign of weakness. And so there's almost like this catch-22 of like, well, in order to be worthy of support, I kind of have to have all my shit together to be able to ask for support. And then, and if you appear like you have it all together, then people don't know that you need support. It seems like you've got it all covered. And I think that happens to a lot of us. We don't show that we need support. There's really, I think, three things that hold us back from asking for support. One is that we've bought into this idea of rugged individualism and like needing to do it all alone. And so we're actually not even in touch with what we need, because we're just like, we're just doing all the things. The second is that we don't know how to ask for support. And the third is that asking for support is too big of a risk, because it means that we have to be seen in our mess. We have to be seen in our imperfection and be vulnerable. And that's really hard.
Yeah.
A lot of us.
And 4 is you do step 3, you ask for the help, and the people around you don't recognize and value the fact that they should be giving you the help.
Yeah.
Or helping you to find that support that you need.
Yeah. Right. Well, and I think that goes back to number 2, which is like, we don't know how to ask. Sometimes the way that we ask doesn't get through, like doesn't set up the other person for success. Sometimes we do it in a very passive aggressive way. We're already really angry and resentful by the time we ask. So it doesn't come out in a way that kind of makes the other person want to help. But yes, I think that's another level of education that, and actually that's a handout that I've been meaning to write for a while from my practice, just to give to the family members of like, this is the kind of support that that she's going to need. Like, it's not that she needs you to come over and hold her baby. She needs you to come over and do dishes or bring meals, or, people a lot. I can't tell you how many people, and I'm sure you see this in your experience, but the in-laws come or the parents come and they're not helpful. They're actually make it harder because they don't understand the kind of support that she needs.
Yeah, I have seen that. And I have seen people ask for help, and the family just says, oh, you'll get over it, or suck it up, or, I did it this way, so you can too,
Yeah.
Yeah. It's when we're living in a society that doesn't value motherhood, then really it's amongst everyone, right? So it's hard to ask for help, receive help, get help. It's hard for people to know how to help you.
Right.
Which actually brings me to a question. You said that you screened yourself. Do you have resources for people who are looking for screening or therapist or something, or looking for more information for themselves?
Yeah, well, you can, I guess anyone could get the Edinburgh scale, which is the one that I use online. You could download it and screen yourself. And it does explain the score, like what's considered at risk, what's considered postpartum depression. Postpartum Support International is a really great resource. There's also community supported postpartum. That's forgetting the woman's name, but I interviewed her for my summit. She does a lot in terms of community building. And yeah, I would say Postpartum Support International and community supported postpartum are both really good. There's also an app called Mothership Rising that is basically like like setting up a meal train, except it's for emotional support. So it's an app that you can, the family can download, and or somebody could do it for her. And they put in everyone's numbers. And so then everyone signs up for a day. And on that day, they're going to be calling and checking up on that person and seeing, how they're doing emotionally. So it's a really cool concept.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
What about any other solutions to this crisis that you can think of? Any other tips or advice or resources?
Well, I wanted to mention the Earth
Mhm.
app. I don't know if that's been
Mhm.
mentioned yet. It's IRTH is how it's like birth without the bias. It was created by
Mm.
Kimberly Seals Ehlers. And so basically it's like a Yelp-like app for Black and brown folks who are searching for a provider to be able to go on there and look at reviews of providers and see who's actually going to treat them with respect. So it's a way of kind of, grassroots effort to put the power back into the consumer. So that's one thing as far as the disparities and the lack of safety. And then I would say for moms and postpartum people, like really, we have to begin to value ourselves, because the reality is nobody's coming to save us. We have to take back our power by deciding that we matter, that our wellness matters, that it's not okay for us to be in survival mode all the time. And the more that we do that, and the more that we demand that kind of support, and that's within our own family structure with our partner, like, hey, I need this much time every day or every week to do something for myself. And that's, asking our extended family for support. And then it's also, demand, there's, what is it? Mothers Rising. I can't remember the organization. They do a lot of political work. Moms Rising, I think it's called. Moms
Mom's
Rising.
rising.
Yeah.
Mhm.
They do a lot of political work around, getting that paid maternity leave and things like that. So, I mean, there's stuff that needs to be done on all levels, but I would say find a group that you can connect with, a group of other mothers and parents that you can receive support from, because nobody can do this on their own. And we have to stop pretending like that's okay, because we all need each other. We need respite. We need breaks. We love our children, but we're going to be a better mom when we get breaks. I know I am.
Yeah.
So, and having those practices that nourish you, figuring out what those are for you. And that might be different than what it was before you became a mom. Like, if you have to kind of reassess and see, what are those things that really light you up? What are those things that really make you feel alive and make you feel excited about being alive? Because those things are really important. And when we don't tend to them, then we are going to feel depleted, and we're going to feel resentful. And that's just going to be a downward spiral.
Yeah. And
Our
giving yourself the space to discover yourself again. I remember the first time I went out without the baby, my
Yeah.
second baby. I was at this beautiful botanic garden. I loved this botanical garden and I loved going there all the time. And I showed up without the baby and I walked around and I just felt a little numb and a little like, why don't I feel so inspired? And it took a while for me to discover myself newly.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And so how can people get in touch with you and what services do you offer?
Yeah. Well, you can find me on Instagram at Motherfly Tribe. On Facebook, I'm my Facebook page is Motherfly, and then I have a Facebook group called Motherfly Tribe. My website is motherfly.mom, MOM. And I have a membership group that we meet monthly, and that's like a circle of support. It's called the Matrescence Circle, and that's for moms with kids of all ages. Matrescence is really lifelong. It's not something that happens overnight. I also have and that's a paid membership group. I have a program, a 6-month coaching program called Mother Birth, which is designed to help midwife that transformation of identity, help you move into motherhood. If you're pregnant, move into motherhood with confidence, with support. And then if you already are a mother, it's really to help you with that transformation of identity, because a lot of people have become parents, have become mothers, but they're still kind of lost. They haven't made that transition in a way that's empowering. And I really think that motherhood is designed to be an enrichment program. It is really a portal to our most potent selves when we have the proper acknowledgement and we have the proper support. And then I offer 2 free monthly groups. One's a pregnancy group and one's a postpartum group. Those are both on Zoom. And they're the first and the third Wednesdays of the month. And you can find the links to those on my Instagram page. I also wanted to just put a plug for a project that is happening with some of the midwives here on the farm, as well as midwives in Poland and the Ukraine. It's called the Sunflower Birthing Circle, and the website is sunflowerbirthingcircle.org. And it's basically a group of midwives and doulas who are trying to make sure that the 80,000 pregnant Ukrainian people that are migrating into Poland, there's about 80,000 that they're expected to birth in the coming months, that they have a safe and nurturing space to birth. And so there's like 4 ways to donate on that page. And you can adopt a birth worker, you can directly contribute to a Ukrainian mother, and there's a couple other ways. So I just wanted to put that out there because it's a really beautiful project and very much needed.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Before we leave off, I just want to, anything else that you have on your mind? Just want to give a little space for that.
I think that I'm complete. I guess the main message I want people to take home is that you're in a transformational process, and that takes time, and it takes space, and it takes support. And so if you're feeling lost, and if you're feeling overwhelmed, that's a part of transformation. It's not the part that we like to think about, the beautiful like emergence of the butterfly, right? But that work in the chrysalis is deep, it's profound, it feels like falling apart sometimes, and then putting yourself back together. So if you feel like you're falling apart, it's okay, but make sure that you have some support too. Like, don't ever hesitate if you're feeling off, if you're feeling like you might be depressed or anxious, or especially if it's interfering with your capacity to eat or sleep or take care of your baby, please reach out for support.
Beautiful. We're organizing a postpartum meetup during the live summit. So
cool.
I'll probably play this video and then have the postpartum meetup right after. I think that would go really well.
Great.
Yeah. Thank you so much for all of this information, all of the support, and all the inspiration.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you for having me.